Hey, what's up, everyone? Welcome back to the second episode of the Learning POB series, where I walk you through every bit and piece of Path of Building and try to teach you all the components that go into it. And then later on, we're going to get a little bit more advanced. We're going to have some chunkier videos that go into walking through an entire build making process from beginning all the way until fine tuning it. Lots of tips and tricks and all of that for you guys. But today we're just going to focus on introduction to the skills panel, how you set your skills up, and how POB can help you refine what your skills are, figure out the best support gems, and all of that. Before we get started, as always, thank you so much to all of you guys for subscribing and becoming patrons. It makes a huge difference. I appreciate it so much. And yeah, I'm glad that you guys are interested in this content and you'd like to support it. Okay, let's get right into it. All right, so the skills panel is kind of where you usually start when you make a build in Path of Building. If you don't know how to import or set up your initial build, check out the last video. But after that, when you're getting a build going, the first thing that you're going to do is some combination of the skill tree, the skills panel, and or the items. So in the upper left corner, we'll want to click on the skills panel right here. You'll see that you have the ability to manage your skill sets. You can make new socket groups, and then there are now default options for your gem. The skills panel is arguably the simplest, and that's why we're starting here. And it's also a great starting place to start putting together your build. If you click the Manage tab, you'll get this pop-up right here. It will allow you to enter new names for different skill sets. So we can say, campaign leveling set, something like this. And then we can make another one like, early end game, and then another one which is like Giga Endgame or something like that. So these will be independent sets. You can double click on them. You can rename them, copy, delete. This can also be useful for making a bossing set or anything like that. From here, we can make socket groups just by clicking new. This is just where we get started. Starting off, we can give it a label. If you don't give it a label, it will just list the primary skill gems that you have in there. It will not list support gems. So if I put in, just like Enlighten support right here, we'll see that there is nothing here. It'll just show the active skills. However, if I put in something like Grace, now it will name this as Grace by itself in the socket group. You could do something like name this auras, put in, Grace, Determination, Defiance Banner, everything like that, and kind of manage it that way. If you delete the name, it'll go back to just showing the active skill gems. Another thing that some people will do is they can make empty socket groups right here just so they can kind of separate it. You can say, hey, all of my auras and all of my support gems, I can drag these up and down so I can kind of get this above this one here. And I can say, these are utility, put some stuff before and after it. Utility goes right here. And then I can name this one damage. And then I can make another one down here and name this, defense, something like this. You can drag them up and down, put them in between here. This can be dual strike right here. And then at the bottom, we can put in, steel skin. If you want to make it kind of pretty and organize it this way, you can do that. It's something that some people like to do if you want to kind of just like manage it a little bit better, make it easier for some people to understand what they're looking at. All right, so getting started, you'll create a new socket group right here. It will automatically give you a dropdown with the different gems that you can type in. And so it will do a short auto completion for anything you type. So I can just type in storm. It'll show me everything with the word storm in it, including at the end of the words. I see both stormbind and firestorm. But right off the bat, we should talk about what gems are you seeing right here? Why do I see Vol Reap at the top? And what is this list? You'll notice that it's not alphabetical. And what that is by default, Path of Building will sort by full DPS. Not only for support gems, but also for active skill gems. Even in a totally empty build, when you click on the gem name right here, it will sort by full DPS of what gets added to your build. But we can also sort by poison DPS, even our EHP for our effective hit pool. And this is a very powerful tool that can kind of help you guide your build making process. For example, if we go to my cast on crit assassin right here, that is pretty well configured at this point, I can go to my primary damage dropdown. And if I click on the empty box right here, it will actually tell me the gem that gives me the most damage. Now, you do have to be very careful about understanding what's going into this. For example, if I need chill and freeze to deal damage, something like concentrated effect has a really big downside, 30% less area of effect. So that's actually why I'm not using it on this build. But this will by default give you a nice little indication for what support gems you can consider in your build. And so while an experienced build maker will have a pretty good inclination and understanding of what support gems are probably best, we do very much rely on Path of Building for giving us that pool for additional options that we may not have considered. The game is just so complex. There's so much going into it that a tool like POB is pretty much necessary for refining a build. But this isn't limited to only support gems. We can actually just make a new socket group, click in the empty gem name, and it'll give us a list of gems that could just buff our build in general. If I have empty gem sockets and I can try to fit things in, let's try to understand what else I can add to the build. So while I picked most of this stuff myself for just like what I know from my game knowledge and my experience, if I have an empty gem socket or two, I can just click right here and try to see what I can add in. And you can see with Vol Righteous Fire alone, I would not be able to sustain regular Righteous Fire. But with just Righteous Fire alone, if I enable this, I go from 141 to 167 million DPS. So if I can fit that in, I probably should. In addition, you can set the default gem level. Normal maximum will be level 5 for Awaken, level 20 for regular gems. Corrupted maximum will give you level 21 for normal gems, but only level 5 for Awakened gems. And then Awakened maximum will go up to level 6 for Awakened. And then match character level. If, for example, you're doing a League Start guide, this can be very useful for, doing certain checkpoints at like Act 5, Act 10, something like that, just to make sure that the gems are matching the level as you're adding them. Default gem quality, I usually leave this at 0 because I also make League Start guys. Show support gems, I've never changed this. You can make it non-awakened or awakened only. I just leave this on all. And then the quality variance, this doesn't matter anymore because quality gems are now gone. All right, so let's put together a rough approximation of a build here. Let's say we're gonna make a dual strike build. You'll notice that immediately when you add a gem, they will have the level drop down. You can pick this. You can even go as high as you want. This is very useful for simulating if you're going to get additional levels on some gear, if you just want to spot check something. This is really nice for just seeing what the drop off is for your gem scaling. Is it worth it to go for level 21 gem? See how much damage you actually get out of that. The variant, this no longer matters. This drop down is now out of date. So hopefully this goes away eventually. And then count. So count is, as it says right here, it is a multiplier, just a straight 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. multiplier for shotgunning. Something like additional totems, something like tornado shot, or something in my example for my current build right now, vortex of projection. You'll see that it says can explode from up to 5 frostbolt projectiles. So each vortex alone is doing 27 million DPS, and then it's multiplied by 5 because there's 5 different projectiles that it's exploding from. Actually, dual strike won't be good here. Let's do something like creeping frost because I think this will be a better example. So we'll see that we are currently at 1200 hit DPS. The next video, by the way, will be going into this panel on the left right here in more detail. It's important to talk about the skills before we look at that panel. Very quickly, we can look at this panel. We see that we have 1200 hit DPS. But when I change this counter, you'll notice that nothing changes on the left side. The top part of this panel is only talking about the damage for a single hit of that skill, then the DPS, which is the multiplier of your cast speed or your attack speed. So you'll see the average hit is 728, but then I'm casting 1.6 times a second. So 728 times 1.6 is 1200. But if I want to see what it looks like with the shotgunning of Creeping Frost, for example, if I'm using lesser multiple projectiles, which gives me 2 additional projectiles, this will then shotgun at 3 hits. To make this show up and see what that calculation is for 3 hits, I'll want to include in full DPS right here. And then you'll see going from 1 at 3,300, we do this, and then it goes up to 5,600 DPS. You'll notice that it's also including the dot DPS. So if we want to look at just the on-hit DPS, 3,400 for the Creeping Frost, and then it's doing 2,200 for the dot. Now, where this item is socketed, this is very important, if you have plus gem levels or anything like that. So let's do a quick example here. The items page is very complicated. This is a couple of videos down the line, but let's just quickly add a life sprig for our Creeping Frost. This will give us plus level of socketed gems as well as increased spell damage. We'll add that to the build right there. Automatically goes into the weapon. You'll notice that the damage did go up. We are now doing 7,800 full DPS, but it didn't go up as much as we would expect it to. That's because it's not socketed in any item. So if we tell it to socket in item 1, now it goes to 8,960. It's telling it to put Creeping Frost with LMP into the weapon, and that weapon gets additional gem levels, which will make it do more damage. So it's very important to make sure that where your gems are, you tell it where it's socketed to get the bonuses for that item. And then as we saw before, if I want to figure out what my best support gem is, I can just click right here. It will automatically sort by DPS. Note that it will only be sorting by the full DPS that you have selected on the left side of the screen. Using the full DPS checkbox in the upper right corner of the skills panel, it will default to only the hit DPS of the selected main skill. This can be altered by the gem option dropdown, what it's sorting DPS by that I explained earlier. As you can see, there's a couple funny outliers right here. Cast when stunned, it's assuming that it's triggering an additional 5.8 times a second, but obviously this would not be realistic. Awakened Elemental Focus is what it's recommending, but we have to think if this is a build that I need Chill and Freeze to deal damage or I care about that, Elemental Focus wouldn't really be good for the build. Culling Strike is basically calculating against the HP of the monster and how much damage that you're doing for the DPS setup. This is rarely the correct choice for your primary damage links. Conk Effect has a very big downside, and so on and so forth. So it's important to kind of sort through these and try to understand what's good and what's bad for your build. If I want to clean this up a little bit, I can say non-awakened gems, so I don't see all those awakened gems, and this makes it a little bit simpler to look at. Also important to understand the cost and reservation multiplier, level requirements, stat requirements, all that type of stuff. We wouldn't get Arcane Surge unless we spent 400 mana, and we can see our Creeping Frost currently only costs 35 mana. Are we going to cast 12 times every 4 seconds? Probably not. So Arcane Surge at a high level is actually kind of dead to us. Now we can go to a lower level Arcane Surge, but we can see that the amount of damage that we get from it goes way, way down, and it's not as competitive as other support gems. So for myself, since we're not crit-based, I actually think Control Destruction is a really good option for this configuration. And these are kind of the calculations that you need to make when you're picking your gems for your build. All right, let's set up some auras. So we're going to do a very traditional old school build. We're going to do Determination. We're going to do Grace. We're going to do Defiance Banner. A little out of date. This is going to be the default thing. Grace, Determination, Defiance Banner, starting off very, very simple. And we can see already that we are over our mana reservation multiplier. Very important is the interplay between the build panel right here. Look for the red numbers. Look for the fact that it says dexterity required, strength required. I don't meet all of the requirements for the build. If I bring the panel up a little bit so you can go to the lower left corner, you can see that there are warnings in this lower left corner that will tell you things that you might be missing in your build that you have to go for. As you're interacting with the skills panel, really good to pay very close attention to the build summary panel as well. So to fix that, we're going to put in an Enlighten level 3 for our build. Even Enlighten level 3 doesn't really fix our mana for us here. So what about an Enlighten level 4? Perfect. We have 2 unreserved mana. Next up, we can do something like our utility of, we can add Frostblink. We can add Steel Skin. We could even add a cast from damage taken setup. And you'll see that it'll say effective trigger rate. Unfortunately, POB won't tell you when your cast from damage taken is actually working. You'll notice that it says effective trigger rate right here, even though I have a level 2 cast from damage taken and level 20 Steel Skin. This you do have to line up yourself. You'll see the red text right here. The gem only supports skill gems requiring level 40 or lower. Also, just a quick little aside here. Any text in Path of Building that is red, that means it's not being processed. Blue text is processed, it's calculated into your build. Red text means that Path of Building doesn't know how to deal with it. It hasn't actually yet been added to POB's lexicon. And because of that, that's something that you do have to simulate yourself, try to understand, and require some massaging to make sure that you're not missing something in your build. For example, in my current Vortex Assassin build, it says 25% increased damage while leeching life. This is red text. Path of Building does not know how to process it. So what I had to do is I went down to the configuration panel. I went to the custom modifiers and I just typed in 25% increased damage right here. It doesn't know how to calculate the cast on Frostbolt for Vortex either. And I had to type in 50% more damage. And even within this custom modifiers panel, which we'll talk about, this will be a later video, you'll notice that there's red text. This is my comments. And then the blue text is the stuff that actually modifies the build. See that it's blue. If I just added like a dash here, you'll see that my damage went way down and the text then turns red. You just have to make it an improper word that isn't processed by POB, and it'll go from between red and blue, and then the damage will update. So in this case, it doesn't know how to process that skill gems are not being able to be supported if they're not the right level. So I have to manually set Steel Skin to a required level that fits the cast from damage taken. So because it says support skill gems requiring level 40 or lower, my Steel Skin right here says requires level 70. So we're just going to do a quick little binary search right here, go down to 10. All right, requires 36 at 10, and then at 11 requires level 40. Perfect. So with a level 2 cast from damage taken, I can use a level 11 Steel Skin. Also on the gems, it says requires level 40, it requires the amount of strength. Obviously, my build is not configured right now to deal with that, but if I just typed in 40 right here, then that number would then go from red to white, which means that it's valid for this build. Similarly, with the strength, I can go down to the custom modifiers, type in, plus 200 strength on the build. And now when I look at that gem, the strength number is white, and I can then use it in this build. Okay, other useful thing is when you mouse over the skill gem, the support gems that support it are highlighted in green. So for Frostblink, for example, if I do added chaos damage, obviously that can't support Steel Skin. So when I mouse over Steel Skin, cast when damage taken is green. If I mouse over Frostblink, both cast when damage taken and added chaos damage are green. That's just because Path of Building doesn't know how to process the fact that cast when damage taken at level 2 cannot support Frostblink. So sometimes it can lead you astray. It's not going to be 100% accurate. If we upload this into Pobbin, it may show links that are not valid because it just doesn't know how to process that. So that's the thing to look out for, but it can be very useful if you're doing something in your primary links and you want to make sure that everything is supporting it properly. This can be extra valid if you're doing something like a cast on crit setup. So for example, let's put in something like Rain of Arrows and Mirage Archer, and we're going to do something a little crazy right here. Mirage Archer with cast on crit, why not? So if I mouse over Rain of Arrows, you'll see that LMP, Controlled Destruction, and Mirage Archer are all supported by it. But if I mouse over Creeping Frost, Mirage Archer doesn't support it, but LMP, Controlled Destruction, and Cast on Crit do. Okay, and then let's say we like this setup right here. We can go to the Manage tab. This is currently the early endgame. I can copy this and say early endgame 2. And so you can make a backup, then double click it, switch over to it. This is very useful if you're kind of upgrading your build. You have different sets of skills, sets of gear as well on the items tab that you want to kind of keep separated. And it can be just really nice to have these different sets, copy paste them, whatever, just to try to manipulate them a little bit better. It can make it a lot easier to try to manage them and have these different, you can have different versions, like save document 1 and save document 2. Definitely the final version of this document. All right, and then last up, I want to talk about vol skills and things being enabled. The thing that I really like to do is put in all of the potential support gems that I may use. I may have a gem swap for something else. So in this Creeping Frost setup, I may want to use something like Blast Rain instead of Rain of Arrows. And what you can do is put in many, many additional gems right here. And we can put in a set of example gems that we can switch between and use these to compare and contrast. And what you can do is actually just disable. There's this enable tab right here. POB will remember the gems that you have here, but you can just turn them off and then it won't be going into the overall calculation. And you can do this with support gems. You can do this with your active gems. Very useful to show examples of like, hey, this is my gem swap for bossing. This is my gem swap for whatever. We could even call this out. So, Creeping Frost, cast on crit setup, and then say something like swap Storm Rain for single target. As an alternative, you can just Control C, Control V, and then you can take your mapping setup and then rename this one like bossing setup. But I find that this is a little bit more confusing than putting the gems in here and then just making it very clear in the rest of the build guide what your intention is, whether through the notes, whether through the label or something like that. But that's an alternative as well. You can Control C, you can Control V, you can press delete these. You can also control click just to turn ones off and on. This will toggle the enabled check mark right here, just if you want to turn a bunch off or a bunch on. That's a thing that you can do. You can control right click to turn things on or off for full DPS. This can be nice if you just want to quickly do that. Little keyboard shortcuts, or you can just right click to set as the main skill on the left side instead of doing this drop down yourself. Nice little shortcuts there if you want to get a little bit faster. All right, and then last up, when you initially import your build, this is really annoying. I wish I could change the default, is your vol skills and your guard skills will always be turned on. I strongly prefer to have my vol skills and my guard skills turned off for the the overview panel of my build, just to get a more realistic expectation. So do be very careful with that. So by default, it'll have both haste and vol haste turned on. If you just directly import it from your profile, these will be on. Similarly, your steel skin, your molten shell, etc., will always be on. For a more realistic look at your EHP and your max hit, I like to have steel skin and all those turned off. So I like to uncheck this enable check mark. Unfortunately, it does change the label. You don't see it anymore if it's not enabled. So in this case, I do like to manually type in the name of the skills so you still see them, even though it's disabled. So that's a little thing that I like to do there. Manually set that if you're disabling your guard skill. And then, like I said, before you save your POB, before you share it with people, unless you're like a hate forge build or something, try to keep your vol skills turned off just to get a more realistic expectation of what the build is. Because something like having haste and vol haste on can very dramatically juice your numbers, and nice to see what your top end is. I think it's more realistic usually to share a POB that has more toned down numbers, something more the average of what you're expecting for your build to perform. All right, and that is it. I'm sure there's a couple little tips and tricks that I missed here, but I wanted to keep this as small as possible. Video's still gonna be longer than I was hoping for. But I want to keep this as small as possible and focus as possible on the important bits and pieces and tips that will get you comfortable with this panel at least. There's always more to learn. There's always more tips to pick up. The goal here isn't to be hyper thorough, but just to be very approachable and easy to learn. So hopefully you got that out of this. Now you're more comfortable starting a build, understanding how POB can tell you some gems to add to your build, maybe understand how some things don't fit in the way that you want them to, things that you may be missing, etc. All right, but that's it for me on the skills panel. Next up, we are going to be talking about the build summary panel on the left side. We're going to go over all sorts of things like what is effective hit pool and why is it a misleading number and why I think it's a little bit dangerous to rely on that too, as well as everything else that it has. That's also good. All right, that's it for me. Gigantic thank you to you guys for watching. I appreciate you so much, especially all the support. It means a lot. Have a good one. See y'all tomorrow. Goodbye.